we will start now module number 5.2, okay? And remember, you are recording this lecture for you to see later. And we are also live streaming this to YouTube, okay? So if everyone is ready, we can start. So today we'll be, in this module, we'll be learning about links. So CompuCell allows you to add links between the cells and exert forces, and that can be used to drive many different kind of processes that cannot be accomplished with what we have seen before. So uh, remember the Zoom logistics. You can ask to the lecture to go faster or slower, and I'll be just like before. I'll be asking you to say yes or no, or send message in the chat and make this interactive. Okay. All right. So the motivation here is based on the biological process called convergent extension of tissues, right? And I use that to do a intro into FPP links, and then we work from simple examples of how that work. They're not in the simple examples, they're not really biological relevant, but only show how you can use those links in the CompuCell simulations. Um, that second to last item there is a mistake. I will not be doing a cell crawling with links, but I will just go after the simple examples direct to modeling conversion extension. Okay, so let's now make a brief review of development. Okay, so on the left is the life cycle of the Xenopus levis frog, and on the right the life cycle of the zebrafish. They're both modeling organisms that's frequently used in many labs to study development. Each one has its own advantages, and in yeah, there's a hand raised. Please ask your question. No? Okay, so let's continue. And what you can see here, and well, and then you can also see the life cycle of the humans, right? So in all of these cases, we start with one cell, and then we grow up to be a full organism. That was true for us. That was true for the frogs. That was true for the fish, and that's mostly true for all multicellular organisms. Okay, and one of the key characteristics that mark development is that in all those cases we start with something that's symmetrical, and looks like a rounded shape, and eventually there is some step there where the tissue actually loses its spherical symmetry and becomes elongated, right? Okay, so we are not just a bigger ball, we actually have an aspect ratio, right? We have a height and so so usually this process is, for in order this to happen, the tissue must start to converge in a given axis and elongate in another axis. So there must be some kind of differentiation in the way the tissue grows, or the tissue should be remodeled to be elongated in one direction, usually in the anterior to posterior direction, and shorter in the other directions. Okay, this can be achieved by differential growth, or can be actually an active process where the cells pull one another in order for this to happen. Okay. So here is a very nice video showing the whole life cycle, or most of it, of a zebrafish embryo. Here you see the cell membranes label and also the nuclei in yellow. And if you watch this video over time, you can see first there is the piboli, the whole yolk is, and now you have conversion extension. You see that the cells are moving inwards, and once they move inwards, well, because they have a volume, they start to shuffle in this direction and thing grows. And then other things happen as well, like the notochord formation, this formation of the somites right here, and then the tissue continue growing, developing, and there are other places in the Xenopus development where you have other instances of conversion extension, but the very first one that happens more or less here is maybe the most visible. You can clearly see the cells going towards the midline and then elongating the tissue like in the other direction. Of course, you cannot really see this elongation very much in this video because it goes out of the range where the microscope can see, but it's happening there. Okay, so now one of the questions that we can ask, okay, well, so this is the precise definition of conversion extension, is the process by which the cells start to interdigitate with one another along a preferred direction, and when they do this, they converge in one direction while extending in the other direction, right? So this happens in Xenopus, this happens in zebrafish, not core formation, as you can see here. This can also happen in a 3D situation where the tissue converge in one direction and extend in another, and then the other axis can either be converging or extending, depending on exactly the mechanism. So this happens at the beginning of epibole in the Xenopus development. Sorry, Xenopus no, the zebrafish development, and it happens in many other instances, even in tubules that is growing. This conversion extension process can happen. So one of the questions that we can have is how those cells are doing this, okay, and how we can model that, because many of you may have interest in, okay, this actually happened in my system, and I would like to model this, okay. So there are basically two ways which tissue can converge and extend depending on the type of cells you are dealing with and the organs that you're dealing with. One of them, which is the first one that was discovered, and that was a work pioneered by Ray Keller in University of Virginia, is that he found out that the cells in the Xenopus embryo, they start to intercalate, and right after blastophore formation, and those cells intercalate by actually crawling on each other, right, exerting forces and pulling themselves along the same direction, and that leads to the conversion in one direction and extension in the other. Another completely different way to intercalate a group of cells happens when the cells are in a more epithelial-like phenotype, and this is a process very well characterized in the Drosophila embryo, where the cells have, they already tile very nicely the tissue, so it's a confluent and nicely packed, and then through some signaling mechanism, the cells at all the cell borders at specific direction start to have an enrichment of myosin. They start to constrict, and this constriction of that specific bordering leads to this T1 transitions, where you go from here to a 4 vertices seen together, and then as the tissue relaxes, it expands and becomes a border in the other direction, where before those two cells were touching each other, they contract their boundary. This leads to this four-way junction, and then the tissue relaxes, and now these other two cells that were not touched before are seeing each other, and those two cells at the beginning lose connection with one another, okay. And yes, T1 transition, okay. And if that happens, if many cells, this leads to the conversion of the tissue in one direction and extension of the tissue in the other direction, okay. Okay, so this is a illustration of how that happens in Drosophila. This is how the cells are marked, and as the things happens, you can see that the cells of the same color start to lose connection between themselves, and the cells of the other color start to interdigitate, and over time this leads to the extension of the tissue in one direction and conversion of the tissue in the other direction, okay. So Another way that the other process is by the cells actually crawling one another, and that's is a little bit more messy, right? Because the cells are constantly pulling one another, so it's harder to follow. But basically, the process is what as illustrated here. The cells are initially, they don't have polarization, then they start to have protrusions. Some signal tells them to organize their protrusions and the crawling activity along a specific direction. And then they ask the cells pull on one another in a specific direction. This leads to the conversion of the tissue in one direction and again extension in the other. Okay, so some cells may actually be doing the both processes at the same time. That's the work by John Wallingford recently that showed that cells in the xenons actually can do both processes at the same time, and one reinforces the other. And in the video that you see below, you see how dynamic this process is. In red is the cell boundary, and in green is atomizing cytoskeleton of the cell that's actually constantly being assembled and disassembled and using to generate the force that pull the cells in a given direction. Okay, these things also happens in 3D environments, and this work that's done by James Sharp. So as the limb of a chicken develops, the process by the way the limb actually extends outside the body, right, is not driven by differential growth, but actually by active cell intercalation of those mesenchymal cells that make the limb bud mesenchyme. And so here you can see all the nuclei in blue, and some cells labeled in green in the outline. And you can see that they don't have it's clearly not the T1 transition mechanism, right? The cells are actually crawling one another and pulling one another, okay? And this is happening in a 3D environment, and as this happens, the tissue converge in both in the anterior posterior direction and also in the medial lateral direction, in the dorsal ventral direction, and that leads to the extension the other direction, which is the medial lateral, or the limb is extending in this way. Okay, so there have been many models of convergent extension, especially for this mechanism of T1 transitions. The first one, it was actually proposed by James Glazier and his students Zajac and Jones in 2003, where the cells just have instead of have the same contact energy uniform distributed around all the pixels, the cells actually have more a differential contact energy depending on where they are in their periphery. Okay. What's the time scale of that movie? Which movie? This one here? 10 minutes, if that's the one that you asking, Lorenzo. Okay. Okay. Okay, so continue, and then there have been many other models, mostly done in vertex kind of models, and the only model that has been proposed to do the cell crawling version of convergent extension was actually one that that me and James and Maciek did together, where we are not actually modeling the cells crawling one another explicitly, but we are only modeling the net result of this activity, which is, when the cells is extending Filippo and pulling one another, what's effectively happening is that the cells are creating a link between the center of mass of each one and pushing them together. Effectively, that's what's happening. So, of course, this is a simplification of what's going on, but this can be done in CompuCell, and is done using those links, plugin FPP links that you'll be playing today. And when you place if you do that with just one cell, the cell does not work that does not work very well, right? The idea is that the cells will be pushing their neighbors on the right and pushing those neighbors on the left. But when all those cells in the tissue does the same kind of movement, that leads to the conversion of the whole tissue in one direction and consequently to the extension of the tissue in the perpendicular direction. Okay, so this is the same simulation on the left and the right, but on the right you only see the cell outlines. The resolution is not very good, I apologize, but you can see the model in action. Okay. So here, once you have, so this is the model we created by the end of this module, and we can also test other things like ask questions like, okay, what if the orientation of the cells is not completely aligned, but a little bit random distributed, or what happens if you have other types of cells in your model that either you cannot make a pull or that do not pull the others but can be pulled. Okay, so this is two outcomes. So here's when the blue cells are refractive and cannot be pulled. And if you have enough active cells that actually can integrate with one another, that can drive the whole tissue to converge and extend. Of course, those blue cells are only kind of lying behind on the side. And if you have only a subgroup of cells that can actually pull on the others, and the red cells can be pulled but they don't actually participate in the process, you can still drive the conversion extension of the tissue, even though you have only 10% of the cells that actually does the participating actively in the process. Okay, so this was actually very surprising for us that did this model. We are not aware that you need so little cells to be actually active to drive the whole process to work. Okay, so this is the plan of action for today. After this motivation, we will do a brief overview of how links work in CompuCell3D. We will do some simple exercise to illustrate how to add those in practice, okay, from the XML level. Another set of simple exercises to manipulate links from the Python code, okay, and then we're gonna try to do our final project of the model, which actually create a simple conversion extension model in CompuCell3D. Any questions before we proceed? No? Then let's go. So this is how the links work in CompuCell. Okay. So basically it creates a spring between the center of masses of two adjacent cells. Okay. That line here between those cells, you can view that as a spring. Okay, I sorry didn't have time to put a spring there. And the energy term that actually connects the two center of masses is just, it has this familiar form where you just basically d is the current distance between those two cells. There is a target distance or the ideal resting length of the spring. And then there is another term here which says how strong is the spring. So if the cells are already at the target distance between themselves, the spring exerts no forces. As soon as they are too close or too far away, the spring restores the cells back to their target distance. Okay. So it has the exact same for the volume constraint, surface constraint, length constraint. It's just that now what is actually being minimized is the distance of the cells up to some ideal distance that they should have. And then every spin flip, every pixel copy that deviates the center of mass away from the ideal distance between those two cells will be penalized. Okay. And every spin flip that drives them towards that ideal distance between the two cell center of masses is favored. Okay. Does it make sense? Okay, so when you create a model and you want to add those links to your model, the thing that you have to select in the wizard is this focal point plasticity option here on under cellular behaviors. Okay. Okay. I'll be uploading the solution for all our exercises after this module. Okay, I have not uploaded anything there yet. The other thing is that when you are using this plugin, is usually a good idea to also have the cell neighbors selected, especially when you want to actually manipulate those links from the Python code. Okay, because you have to find which cells you're touching and create a link between them or delete a link from them. Okay, so this is how the plugin looks inside the XML code. Okay, the name of the plugin is focal point plasticity, or FPP as we refer to them, and it has here of course a bunch of parameters. One of these parameters is lambda here, which will tell how strong the constraint is, and the target distance, which say what's should be the ideal distance between those two cell pairs. Okay. The other things that is very important is that there will be one setting of parameters for each possible pair of cell types. So in this simulation is all the cells that are of type my cell and my cell will have this kind of links. Okay, if you have another types of cells, cell A, cell B, cell C, the XML code will automatically generate one of these things here for AA, AB, BB. Okay, so all possible combinations will have its own set of parameters. Okay. The other thing is that you can also define a maximum distance that the cells may have. Okay, so if you have those two things that are linked, but from other forces in your simulation, the cells are being driven apart, you can specify through this parameter here when this link will break. Usually if the cell is being pulled on or not too much, the link breaks and there's no more FPP link or spring constraint between those two cells. Okay, and the other thing that this thing allows us to specify is the maximum number of links of specific cell type. Okay, so this is meaning that only each cell can only make one connection with another cell of the same type. If you make two, then the cells can actually have two links connecting two cells at the same time. Okay, so you can specify that in the code as well. Does this make sense so far? The other things that, yes, thank you for answering. But you can see that there are other parameters here, okay? Just like this activation energy and this neighboring order. And we wonder, we will not be using this for this tutorial and this module, but just to briefly explain how they work. They are basically used to inform CompuCell what should be the criteria to create a new link. Okay, so if the cells come together, right, they maybe form a new link. Okay, but when you create a new link, you have a problem because before having a new link there was no spring energy between the cells, and as soon as you create a new link between those cells that just touch together, this energy will be we will increase the energy of our system, right? So the act of creation a new link after a spin flip increase the energy of your system, so it's likely not accepted by the normal POTS dynamics. Okay. So in order to actually make this possible, you have to add this activation energy where if you create a link, you have the new energy of the link itself minus this energy to make it happen. Okay, so this activation energy is a facilitator for the creation of new links. Okay, so usually use a negative. That's why it's a negative number, and that's why you usually add that. Okay, but usually 50 is enough number to allow the creation of links. We'll be just using that as default and do not worry about that anymore. Okay. The other thing is that you have this neighboring order, which tells how close the two cells have to be to each other before you attempt to create a new link. Okay. Steven asked if you can make all these parameters specific for cell pairs. Yes, you can, and that you'll be doing, and you need to do that for tomorrow's Convergent extension. And we'll be by the end of the mod, you'll be talking about how to do this. Okay? Yes, that can be done from the Python level. You can specify a different link between each different cell type parts. You can add links, delete links, modify the links. Okay? You can do all this sort of fun stuff. Oh, how many leaves are new Hookean? Is there a way to add the parameters to model new Hookean dynamics? Um, there is a way to modify the. Sorry. This formula here from the XML level. I do not know. For example, you can, instead of having this 2 here, you can have 1 and make this an absolute value. So there's a way you can actually modify this formula from the XML code to exactly make new Hookean. I don't know. Well, it depends on how you define the new, what's going to be the function, but yeah, but there are ways to go about it. Okay. Yes, and what else were I saying? Okay, and this neighbor order is just saying how close the cells have to be before you actually create a link. And a neighbor order equals 1 usually means that the cells have actually touched. Okay, that's all it means. Okay, but you guys will not have to worry about that. Okay, so let's now start to do an exercise, and this exercise will be, let's create a simple model with links. Okay, so everybody go to your Nano Hub or to your desktop, open TweetIt, and let's create a new CompuCell3D project. Okay, I'm gonna go with the next exercise a little bit quick, because by now you should all be very familiar with how CompuCell works by create a new file. Okay. Oh, before you do that, I just want to emphasize that these links can only work, okay, when you make those links, you are basically linking a specific point in space to another point in space, okay? So they need to be anchored somewhere. So usually when we talk about a force between the cells, right, or constraints between the two cells, we are linking the center of mass of one cell to the center of mass of the other cell, okay? That's mostly what we'll be doing in this in this module. That's everything that we're doing in this module. But you can also define a link between the center of mass on a cell and a fixed point in space. Okay, so you can actually create what is called an anchor, and you can use that. Okay, so that basically be saying, okay, maybe the cell is attached to the basal membrane behind it that you're not explicitly modeling, but you can, so it'll be hard to move the cell from its original position, although the cell is deformable. So that would be one way to actually anchor the cell to a specific point in your space, and that can be in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. So this distance does not necessarily need to be from one cell to another cell, but it can also be from one cell to a fixed point in space. Okay. So James is just adding a comment in the chat that he have used linkers to model elastic micropillars, for example. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to our simple exercise. So let's create our first model with links. Please go to CompuCell3D, a menu, project. Let's call this module 52 underscore examples. Okay. Give this name of the model. On this, let's just leave everything as it is and hit continue. Okay. No modifications here. You have to add a cell type as always. So give our preferred cell name. It can be your own name. It can be the name of your dog. It can be something more relevant. You can call it mesenchyme or epithelium or fibroblast or something like this. Okay. So here I just gave my cell because it's a short name. Okay. And I like it. Then we ignore the chemical fields. And here we have to select what we want to modify, and that will be contact, focal point plasticity, and volume flex. The layer estimation we just use the same as given, 256, 256. Okay. Do you want neighbors? Yes, we want neighbors. You can select that. So please select some neighbors. I don't think we need for this example, but feel free to select. That's it doesn't hurt. Okay. And after you select all these plugins, we can just hit complete and do the simulation. Okay. So once you do that, you can again open in the player. So right click or double click the module 5 on the name of the module on the under CompuCell3D project, ask it to open in player, and once you play simulation, you should see something that looks like that. Okay. So are you seeing something that looks like the figure in my slide? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. If you're not seeing, it may be because you don't have the FPP visualization turned on. Okay. If you want to see the FPP links, you actually have to go to in the CompuCell player visualization and select FPP links, and then maybe you should be able to see it. Okay. So here, all those white lines here is actually the links between cell pairs. Okay. Maybe by your default configurations, your cell boundaries are also white. Okay. So you can fix that by going to click on the tools button, going to the cell color and change the color of your cell to be a darker color, and make the cell borders to be black, for example, or you make the cell colors to be white, and then you make the FPP link here to be dark. Okay, so choose whatever configuration you like to better visualize the links. So we want to see the links in the simulations. Okay, so are you all seeing now, after you pull up the configurations, something that looks like my screen here? I got 3S, 4. Okay, so you may notice that not all the cells are linked together, just a few of them, and the cells only connect at most one pair. Do you know why? Well, okay, so what's going on here is that we are just using the basic configuration of the FPP links as automatically generated by the wizard, right? And it should be exactly as you see here, as well as in your code. So we, by default, CompuCell just gives a maximum number of junctions equals to 1. So what happens is that as the cells start to interact with one another through the pixel copy attempts, they basically make the link with the first cell it interacts with. Okay, and then you have the formation of all those links. Uh, of course, because the pixel copy attempts is a random process, the order of which cells create their links is also random, and there is no guarantee that all those cells you have a available cell to link to, because this maximum number is checked both for the cell that's make the link for and as well as the cell that's receiving the link. So you do have things like this lonely cell here that did not find any partner. Okay, so the first exercise that you can do, you can try to change the maximum number of junctions from 1 to 2 to 3 and see what happens. Okay, and while you can do that in the code, I suggest that you try to do that in the player, which is more fun. So go one by one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then keep going and tell me what you see. Okay, good question from Cicely. I don't know if that's the way to pronounce your name. What's the difference between parameters and internal parameters? Yes, they are both there. It's just that your cells can either be represented by a single domain or by a collection of domains. Okay, so remember the exercise, the cell migration, where the cell was made of a cytoplasm, a nucleus, and a front. Okay, that is a cell that has 3 compartments. Okay, and you can specify the links to be either between cell compartments that belong to the same cell or for compartments that belong to different cells. Okay, so these internal links or internal parameters is for links that of cell domains that belongs to the same cell or the same cluster of cells. Okay. Okay. So we will be doing that later in the module 5.3. We'll be seeing that again in module 5.3 as you make compartmentalized cells. Trying to change color white one has crashed. Oh, was not supposed to. Maybe can stop simulation, change the color, and then restart again. You can try that. Okay. Okay. So what you have seen is that you can keep increase the number of links, and as you increase that number, you of course get more links being formed between the cells. And but because this two-dimensional simulation with all the cells the same size, the cells tend to organize themselves in a hexagonal lattice. So having connections after 6 does not really add you more connections to your system. Okay. So did you all get things that look similar to those pictures here in my slide? I hope you did. Of course, the way the cells pack between cells is not perfect, so you can still have cells with not all the connections that they wish. Okay, but as the cells move around, they should be able to connect all the neighbors. Okay, so of course we only change one parameter of the FPP plugin. We can now also try to play with other ones, and one that's very nice and very relevant to play is actually the target distance that between those cells. Okay, so that should be that target distance here. You can either change here from the code or from the player itself. Let's change it and make it uh, lower and then make it higher. Uh, just choose a connectivity level, can be 1 or 6 or higher, and just try yourselves and tell me what you see. Okay, there's a question here. If you have a 3D tissue in CompuCell, would the connectivity level max out higher than 6? Yes. Yes. Then in 3D, well, in 3D, if all the cells have the same number of, same size, the tissue usually pack with how many neighbors? Does anyone know the answer? I think it would be 9, 12 to 14, I believe, right? Well, as far as I knew, the best packing that minimize energy in 3D for it's an unsolved problem, but it'll be something between 12 and 14. Okay, Juliano should know. His master thesis was on foams, right? Okay, James Gray said 14. Of course, if you have some cells that are bigger, some cells that are smaller, right? Then some cells will have more connections, some cells will have less connections, and then you may want to use a higher number or lower number. Okay, so if you just put 30, then as you make as much connection as you can. But of course, when you have cells of different sizes, right, the typical distance between one cell and the other cell will be the sum of the radius of those two cells, right? So now we cannot specify a target distance that will be valid for all the cell connections because some cells are bigger, some are smaller. So that's something that, so some cells, the bigger cells will be under compression, right? So that's something that if it's the case, if the cells of the same type can have different sizes, you probably have to update those parameters for each one of those cells or each one of those cells pairs, and then you have to go into the Python code. Okay. Yes. Okay. So what happened? So what you guys saw? Okay. So let me show. Oops. Let me show here. So here's the tissue with a connectivity of 4. Okay, maximum number of junction of 4, and then I make the target distance to be equal to 1. That led to a slight compression of the whole tissue. Now you're basically having two energy transfers competing with one another. You have the links try to bring all the cells very close, but you have the volume exclusion from the volume plugin that does not allow the cells to be brought that close. Okay, but that leads to a stiffening of the tissue as a whole. Okay, if you use a target distance that's bigger than the typical center to center distance of your cells, which in this case is 7, well, you're trying to make those cells now move apart. Okay, and you have this kind of crossed links that you see here, and I think that's what you're referring to, Farnush. Yes, this happens, and as you increase this distance, your tissue becomes rougher and rougher, and of course at the limit where you just make this irrealistic high, right, you start to get those those very weird shapes here that I don't believe there's any biological counterpart. But yeah, this can happen. Okay, so I'm just usually if the cells stop touching each other, right? That's when you basically want the link to break. Okay, so you can control that by setting the target distance to be a little bit lower than what it has by default. So by default, the maximum distance is set very high to 20. You can make this maximum distance equal to 8. And if you do that, as soon as you have a target distance that's higher than 8, the cells will move apart and then break their links. Okay, so having a maximum distance very close to the target distance in the XML code is a way to make the links very dynamic. So they are constantly forming and breaking, forming and breaking. Okay, and then you don't have this crossing links as you see here on this picture. So do you all got those kind of outputs? Yes, okay. Okay, so you can see that now you have another tool to play in your simulations. Okay, how you get the output like the last picture? Okay, in the last picture I just make the target distance equals to 20. If you do that, eventually you start to get this kind of stuff. You can try and you should see something that looks similar. The first thing you see is that some cells start to evaporate, right? They're kind of expel from the system, and eventually you start to get those fingering kind of shapes there. It looks interesting. Maybe there is a biological system that behaves just like that, and this would be a good model, but I don't know any that does this. Any more questions? Can we proceed? Okay, so now let's do a second exercise. Let's do an exercise where you actually be dealing with two cell types instead of one. Okay. Oh, Daphne said that make target distance 20 and 8 junctions and look fabulous. That's great. Okay. Maybe you can share that in the Slack channel for us. Okay. So exercise 5.2, let's make a model with two cell types. Okay. I trust that by now you know how to create a CompuCell simulation without me going through all the steps. But let's create now two cell types. You can call them green and purple, as you can see here. And then I'll ask you, the first thing is do not allow the cells of different types to have links between themselves. Okay, so you should get something that looks like this. Only the cells of the same type have links. You can do that by either commenting that line of code where they have the cells that specify the links between cells of the same type, or setting its maximum number of junctions to 0. Okay. After you do this very first one, there are those three other challenges that I give to you. Can you make the cell actually actively mix with links? And can you play with the FP link properties to induce a little bit of cell sorting? So Lucas asked a question. Can we set the maximum distance less than the target so that they automatically break? Yes, you can. Yes. Then this will be constantly, maybe they'll never form a link, or maybe they'll form and break very soon. It depends on what is the typical distance of the cells. If we target to be higher, but the breaking language be a little before, you form the link, the cells start to move apart, and then it breaks before the. So in this simulation, all the internal parameters do not matter. Okay, we will not be using them, so you can delete them or comment them out. Okay. So this is a good time to make a pool. I should ask my colleagues if it's okay to erase the previous pool and do a new one. Okay. So for those of you that finished the exercise, how did you go about inducing cell type mixing using links? Can anyone unmute yourself and talk or write in the chat? No volunteer? Oh, your simulation crashed. Okay. So what do you guys think it should be done to make those cells mix with FPP links? Which type of pair should be connected? My cell 1 to my cell 2. Okay. Oh yeah, of course, I forgot to say, if you guys need help, please raise your hand or contact, just ask and we will send you to the breakout rooms, okay? Forgot to give this reminder. Yes, Ajay, if you make the links to my cell 1 and my cell 2, and what about links with the cells at the same time? Did you turn on or did you turn off? You turn off, right? Uh, and was that enough to drive mixing? And you probably want to make their target length to be a little bit shorter so the cells will, of the different types actually pull on one another. How many junctions you allow for them for those cells? 2, 3, 4, 8. Okay, in the interest of time, I just go ahead and show the what I got. So On the left is the simulation snapshot and the parameters that I chose to drive the mixing or this checkerboard-like pattern, okay, between cells using links. And on the right is a set of parameters that I chose to actually drive a sorting of those two cell types, okay. So on the left one, I set the links between green cells and purple cells to be 0. If you just set the maximum number of names to be 0, the CompuCell3D will not create any links of that type of cell pair. And I just allow the links between the cells of different types, like I just suggested. And I made those target distance to be very low, 1, so the cells really pull on those. And by this pulling mechanism, you kind of generate some kind of movement of the cells and induce the mixing of the two different cell types. Okay, and on the right, I try to obtain the reverse effect, sorting those cells. So here, what I did is I just set the maximum number of junctions between green and purple to be 0, so cells of different type do not interact via links. And I set very low energies between target distance between cells of the same type, and I made one of them to be a little bit more stronger and have more connections in the hopes to maybe make all those green cells to go inside. That happens a little bit, but it's a little bit limited, the amount of cell sort that you can have through this mechanism. It's not as efficient as driving cell sorting to the additional energies or the contact energies of the cells on their surface. Okay, so okay, there are 2 comments here. Okay, on day 1 or 2, we discuss modeling sorting using difference in contact energies. Yes, that's usually what we do. Here we're doing that with links, but contact energy also plays a role. Yes, in fact, using contact energies is better to drive this kind of process than links. The links are not very good, not very efficient. How do you balance this mechanism if you were to incorporate something like this in our model? Well, you have to go back to your biological system that you're trying to model and ask yourself, okay, what's really happening, right? Maybe as the cells are sorting to the contact energies, they start to make tight connections between cells of the same type. So maybe your model has a mixture of this. The cells first sort out by contact energies, or what would be the biological equivalent to that, and then they make tight connections. Maybe, or in other words, the cells kind of start to create an epithelium, and then you can start to create the links between the cells of the same type. So that would be one way to add those 2 mechanisms together in the same model of cell sorting. And that will allow the cells, once they connect, to not break apart, or at least the cells that are more cohesive. What are the units of target distance and maximum distance? The units are in pixel. Oh, I should have said that. Yes, is in distance measured in pixels, right? And of course, if you know what's the pixel conversion into micrometers, that you have your unit in real units. Okay. Someone is asking for a breakout room. Please, if someone in the team could help, I appreciate. So I do not know if I answer your question. Or if someone in the course has something to add. The other reason that maybe it's not a good idea to use links to drive cell sorting is that usually the cells that undergo cell sorting, they are very mesenchymal and they are very in a fluid-like state, okay? And links is usually used when the cells are solid. At least this kind of passive links where the cells are connected and they make a strong connection by adding a link. That's usually a behavior when the cells have a very tight junction connection. So do for interesting pattern. Are the parameters relevant for experiment? Well, that is a question which parameters are relevant for each experiment or each specific system that you're studying. It's a job of the model themselves that has to choose, right? So in the case where the cells are actually crawling one another, you can see, okay, if this is the center of the cell and this is the center of the cell, how far they can actually extend the protrusion of Philip order to bring the other cell. So you can set that to be the maximum range of the cell. So that is where it is a question that we ourselves cannot answer beforehand. It really depends on the system that you're modeling and what you're trying to capture and what you're trying to represent with the specific plugins and parameters that you're using, and mechanisms, techniques that you're using in your simulation. Can those parameters play enable discovery? Okay, like do a parameter scan and try to find for the set of parameters combination that gives rise to the desired shape. If that is what you're asking, they well, any parameters here in all the plugins can be scanned and varied to try to match desired output. Um, there are ways to do that. CompuCell has a built-in parameter scan. You'll be learn about that later this afternoon. Okay, and you can also use more fancy algorithms with parameter scan. Not sure if parameter, but you can do other kind of searches of parameters to find optimal set of parameters that actually match your experiments. I believe James Luca has something like that. He has done that in the past. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Just very exciting.
Okay. Yeah, but we do have, yes, parameter scans built in CompuCell. Okay. Okay, so maybe can go move on. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, there are ways to control the links from the Python code. Okay, uh, so all these examples that you have seen, you set them up at XML and let the CompuCell manage them. But sometimes you want to manage those links yourself. Okay, and to do this, you have to go to the Python code and but before you can do add any kind of manipulation of the links in the Python, you have to tell the XML that you want to do that so it can let you do that. And this is done in the XML by uncomment the local slash tag in the XML code. So if you look at your XML code and go to the focal point plasticity plugin, you will see this local here comment out, a comment. You can uncomment, and once you do that, you allow your all those links that are being generated by CompuCell to actually be modified from the at the Python level. Okay. Usually, when you are doing this local change in the links, you want to turn off all the links that the XML will generate to not have conflicts between what you want to do and what the CompuCell will automatically do otherwise. So usually when you add this local tag, you want to set all the maximum number of junctions for all the possible cell pairs to 0. So if there's any link that appears, it's because you told the mod to create them, okay, and not it was not created by the machine itself. Okay. Um, So when you are, and then when we are controlling the links from the Python code, tweak it, make your life easy for you. And there is this CompuCell3D Python option there in the menu, which you have probably already seen in the last few days. And there is a focal point plasticity option there. And when you click there, you should see all this list of all the fun stuff that you can do with links. You can create new links between two cells. You can update existing links, delete existing links, get information about links, visit all the links of a cell, as you see here on the bottom. You can also create anchors, which is going to be attach a link from a cell center of mass to a specific point in space. So you have all those different options there to play with. We do not have time to explore all of them, but you'll be exploring some in the next exercise. Okay. So one of the options that you'll be using a lot in this module and the next is to create an FP link between two cells and delete an FP link between two cells. So this is how those comments look from at the Python level when you use link management create FP link. It gives spit out this code for you, where the first entry is the cell that is making a link. The initiated here is the second cell at which you link the first cell to. And here the lambda distance and target distance are those two parameters of your FP link energy term. And the maximum distance, as you have already seen, is how far you can push the link before it breaks. And the other thing that you can do, that you'll be doing, is choose this option, delete links attached to a cell. So when you call this option, you are basically erasing all the links of that this specific cell has. Okay, does this make sense? Okay, so with this, I will now set you the last exercise of the module as promised. Let's create a simple model of convergent extension. Okay, so to do this model, you have to create a simulation with a group of cells the same type. So you can go back there and say create new simulation. And when you add the cells, you just need one cell type. It can be mesenchyme, the name of the cell type. And you need to select volume, contact, FPP links, and enable tracker. Okay, so that first part is easy. The challenge here is actually doing the two other parts. And what I want to do is that every given Monte Carlo steps, after some initial time, the cells should delete all their current FPP links and create new ones. Okay, and the rules for creation new FPP links should be the links must be between cell neighbors. Okay, so for each cell, we have to go over all the neighbors of the cell and create links between them. But the neighbors have to be to the left or to the right of the cell. Okay, so cells that are above or below the current cell, you should not make the link. You only should make links to the cells on the left or to the right. Okay, so to do this, we have to calculate the distance and the angle that those cells are making with respect to the horizontal. So there are those two functions here that you can use. X, Y, Z equals self-invariant distance vector between the cells. So as you go over your neighbors, you can actually get those coordinates, distance between the two cells. And then there is also this function from the math library in Python, where you can actually, given this y and an x coordinates, get the angle that this forms, and this function a tan2 returns a number between minus pi and pi. Okay, and then you can to check if you're on the left, if your neighbor is to your left or to the right, and then if it is, then you create a link between them. So I'll give you a few minutes to set up the simulation. And if you need help, please, they are just ask for help from the team and we can meet you on the breakout room. Okay, in the wizard should be in the second to last panel. If you go back here, should be on this one, cell neighbor, just below center of mass. If you miss that from this, there is a way to add that back in the XML code. If you go that to XML code, you can click in some place that is not inside any plugin, and then from the XML CML, you go to plugins, and then there is the neighbor tracker. You can select that and you add that to the code afterwards. Okay, good. So most people, of course, need more time in this one. This was a hard exercise. So maybe we can do the following. I can walk you through my code to see how this is done. How about that? Okay, that'd be good. So I'll stop sharing and then I'll share. My tweeted. Can you all see my screen here? Yes, okay. So here's the, well, I call it tutorial conversion extension, right? So let's look at the XML code. So in XML code, I have all the basic things. Okay, so this is by default. I just have one cell and I gave the name type 1 and I kind of regret that. But it has the volume plugin, it has the center of mass here, it has the neighbor tracker. Let's suppose you forgot to add the neighbor tracker in your code. Okay, I forgot to click that. What do I do? Yes, have a question? Okay, so suppose you forgot to select the neighbor tracker, so I just delete the neighbor tracker here from this code. One thing that you can do, you can go to, you're not really seeing, new share, desktop, okay. You can go here to CompuCell3D, right, plugins, and there's the neighbor tracker here, okay, and you can click and then you place the neighbor tracker there for you in case you missed, okay. So you have this, so if you miss something in the wizard, do not panic, you can go back and through this XML add back what you missed. The wizard just makes things easier for you, okay, but you can place it back later. Okay, so you have all these plugins, and then here you have the focal point plus this plugin that we're talking about. So because we want to manipulate the links from the Python level, one thing that you may have missed is that we have to uncomment the local tag. Okay, so the local tag is uncomment, and that allows us to go to the XML, to the Python code, and actually change the links. The other thing is that I don't want the CompuCell to be making links for me. I want to have full control of the links. So I made those two parameters here for the parameters for the cell pair connections and for different cell pair connections to be 0. So the CompuCell will not do any links for me. I'll have to tell them through the Python code to the links themselves. So that's the first part that you have to do in your code. You have to make untag this, okay, and make those two parameters to be 0. Everybody follow? Is the should increase the font of my code or not? It is fine. Okay, if this fine is legible, I'll keep like this because that you can see more code at the same time. Okay, so this is the XML code, so that's all you need to do. You just have to allow your Python code to happen. Okay, now let's go to the Steppables. Okay, so of course there are many ways to accomplish what you want to do. Okay, so what you want to do this thing here that's on the back, right? So every given Monte Carlo step, delete all FTP links and create new ones, okay? And then I want to follow these orders. So there are many solutions. This is my solution to how to implement this, okay? So I just went to the, I just used the Steppable that the wizard creates for me. And here I'm not using the start function, so I deleted. And here on the step function, I first check that after a given amount of time, so I allow myself to kind of move around a little bit. And then after, let's say 300 Monte Carlo steps, I tell all myself to delete the current links and I create those new ones, okay? So I could have everything done right there, right, inside this if statement, but instead I've created those two functions, okay, that I call here, which is one is delete links and the other is create links, okay? And what I do here is that in this create links, I go over all the cells in my simulation. So there is a loop here, and I choose the option remove all cell FP links. Okay, so I'm going over all the cells and deleting all the current links. So those, you don't need to memorize how to write those things. You can simply do, remember, use your CompuCell3D Python, visit all cells, okay, and you automatically get this for loop of over all the cells. And to the code to actually delete all the links of a given cell, you can just retrieve by going here to CompuCell3D ML Python, focal point plasticity, and then delete FP links attached to a cell, and that will delete all those links, okay? So it's right here. So just repeat it. I'm going to remove. Okay, so this function delete all those links, and then I create another function that we're going to create those links. So the function create links, notice that when you create those functions inside your CompuCell Steppable, you call them by using the self in front of it, and in the function itself you have to pass the self parameter, which is basically stating that it has access to everything that CompuCell has. Okay, so in this self create links, I again go over all the cells in my simulation. Then, well, actually, I'm not using this. Let me delete. I go over all the neighbors. Oh, sorry. And here I'm creating another function that returns all the neighbors of my cells. You can either use this or use directly this loop of for neighbors, okay? And basically, so this creates a collection of neighbors that you can use. And I'm going over all the neighbors, and then I'm adding to my list. So basically, I'm going over all the cells that are neighbor to my cell. Let me do this in a more normal way. Okay, this is a fancy way to do it, but let me do this the straightforward way. You just go here, go over all the cell neighbors. Okay, you get this link, and then you want to check first if your neighbor is a cell and it's not the medium, and if it's a cell, you also want to check. And well, if it is a neighbor, that's already enough. Okay, and if it is a neighbor, what you next want to do is you want to calculate the angle between the cell and the neighbor, right? So you get this function, get the distance from one cell to the other as a vector, right? And then once you have those x, y, and z components of this vector, you can calculate what's the angle that's made with the horizontal axis, okay? And here, just to make things easier, I'm converting this angle into degrees, okay? So instead of having to be a number between minus pi and pi, it's going to be a number between minus 180 to 180, okay? And now that I have this angle, I can check whatever it is to the right or to the left, okay? If it's to the right, then that means that my angle is something that is a small angle between 0 and some maximum neighbor that I define. So here, on the top outside the function, I define those global variables called strain, target distance, maximum angle, maximum number of neighbors. Okay, we'll not be using all of them, but basically I'm checking, okay, if my angle or the absolute value of my angle is between this angle to the top or this angle to the bottom, okay, I create a link basically, but this will only make the links to the right, okay. You can also have those good angle to the other side, right, where it's between, which is around 180 degrees up and down from it. So what I do a transformation of this angle back to center it back to 0 and check the same thing. Okay, is my angle on the other side within this angle range? So if it is within this angle range, either to the right here or to the left as indicated here, then I create a link between that cell, which I'm looping over, and the neighbor, which I just found, and with this given strength or this lambda, this target distance within the cells, and this maximum distance before the link breaks. Okay. So, and when I do this, I can just run the code, and you should see the tissue conversion and extending. Okay. So, for how many of you did this work? No, the code's not on the drive yet. I'll put at the end of this module. Okay. But you can copy what you see here. You got conversion but not extension. Okay, that's interesting. or maybe you have to wait a little bit and then you see the extension. We need to set target volume. Yes, if you don't have target volume, then this will just squeeze the cells, and yeah, then you have conversion, but not necessarily extension. The extension part is a consequence of the conversion. So the conversion is the active mechanism. The cells are trying to converge, but because they also have a volume, they squeeze and then they escape into the other direction. Okay. So if you're missing the volume plugin, you can go back here, and where's the volume? You can add it back. So if you miss the volume plugin at the beginning, Kato, you can go here again, CompuCell3D ML plugins, and select volume, and automatically finds which cell types you have in your simulation and place the volume right there. So if you, hopefully when you place back the volume, it will work. Okay, so yeah, the conversion extension only happens because you have the conversion mechanisms, which are the links that cells create, right? Plus the volume exclusion of the cells, which force the extension part as a result. So yeah, so here's again the create the link code. Okay. So for this A10 to work, you actually have to go to import the math library from Python. Otherwise, it does not work. Okay. Oh, the line 38, the later part, yes. Let me extend this here. Is all this. Okay. Yeah, it's a very long command because you have to specify the source cell, the target cell, the strain, the target distance, and the maximum distance. So there are many arguments to this function. So in this case, you see that I made those links really strong because I set the target distance to be 0, but you can set a different target distance. Of course, if you make your target distance to be something that's higher than 7, then you'll be doing the opposite. You'll be drive things apart in one direction. That's something that you can guys try to do and see what happens, right? But usually want the target is to be 0 or something, a small number, so you can actually be driving those two cells together. Okay, so for how many of you did this code work? Okay, it worked for you. Great, it works. That's great. Okay, let me run the simulation here. Opening player. Okay, so this is my simulation. Okay. Actually, I'm driving the links on the other direction. Oh no, I know what happens. Okay. So one thing that I ask you guys to do was to do this at every given frequency, a set up frequency to call to delete out links and create new ones. Okay. Uh, so you actually want to do a specific time frames. Okay. So here I am. Okay, so the way you can do this is by setting the frequency here. So this steppable is only called every 100 Monte Carlo steps. So there was a question from don't you have to hold that for a few times Monte Carlo steps to actually have time to put those cells? Well, in this case, even if you have a frequency of 1, because you're constantly making those links again and again and again, you are basically keeping the same links forever. So every Monte Carlo step there is a link inactive, so it kind of works. So let me just run simulation. So here I'm running simulation. I'm allowing some time for the cells to relax their boundaries, and I'm creating those links. So let me make this zoom out. And you can adjust the parameters. I can make this angle a little bit higher. Instead of being 45 degrees, 55 degrees. That usually works better. So simulation, play again. So for this simulation, 55 works a little bit better. You can see the links forming and breaking apart. Okay, but over time you should see the cells to converging and extending. Okay, maybe I can make this even this target to not be that strong. Oh, I didn't change that. Oh, okay, I changed the wrong parameter. Here, let me go back to my simulation. Okay, that should have worked better. If you start with a rectangle, that should still work. The only problem is that you have to maybe add a little bit more of time before you actually start the links to allow the cells to rearrange, and then it should be able to work. But it should still work with a initial rectangular shape. Okay. So this is the simulation working. I'll leave it here and allow you guys to see the code again. Okay, so did it work for everyone? Yes, yes, okay. So we already, again, over time, so you have to stop here. But things that you can do later, you can, besides have this simulation that always happen at the same direction, right? You can modify your code that you have some global direction at which the cells converge and extend. Okay, so maybe I can show you guys very quickly how you do this because that is very fun. So the way to do this, where you can set up a angle here to be let's say 65, and then here when you are actually, after you convert your angle to degrees, you can add this modification. Your angle actually be the, I can just copy here, right? You just add this global angle to the current angle between those two cells, right? And then you divide by 180, and you have to use this the division with a percentage, which is the module division, and that aligns the two cells with respect to the global orientation. And then you can have a convergent extension instead of having only the vertical direction. You can have at any angle that you wish. So let's say if you want to happening at 45 degrees, you just set this global parameter here, 45, and you add this code here. And when you do this, let's say you should see your cells not convergent extension in this direction, but convergent extension in the diagonal. Okay, please try this and tell me if it works. So all we need to do is define this angle here outside, and then add this line here where you actually rotate the actual angle of the cells and do the and check it like this. Okay, Ian, it works for you. That's great to hear. Okay, so I will try to see if it's working for me as well, right? I'll stop here, play again, and when the links start to form, okay, now they start at angle 45 degrees, okay, and now the tissue should now extend diagonally. Okay, so you can choose which direction it is convergent extension, converting, extending. And the other very fun thing that you guys can do is that instead of defining a global angle to converge and extend, you can define a cell-specific angle to converge and extend. So each cell is trying to put their neighbors at a specific angle. And then you can have regions of your tissue that converge in one direction and other regions that converge in other direction. Okay, so this is basically done here in this part of the code. I just define a start function where each cell receives a kind of vector, right, and has an angle based on this vector. And here's the same trick, but instead of rotating the angle calculation by some global number, it rotates by the actual cell global number. And with this, you can have each cell to have a different rotation angle, and then you can have you can try to get different shapes in your simulations, like all the cells on the right try to convert extending this direction, and all the cells on the left try to convert and extending in the other direction. Then you can form a T, or you can form a star, or you can form many kind of very fun shapes if you try to do this. Okay. Okay, I know this went a little bit over, but I will stop here. I will share this code with you to see how I went about coding this all the things. But I hope that the basics of how to manipulate links is clear, and you can actually try by yourselves later. Well, that's already the end of the module. I'll be with you again in the next module, where you're gonna try to use links to drive tissue folding. Okay, so I'll stop here. If there okay, we'll start back at 2:50 in 25 minutes, right? And I'll stop sharing, and I'll upload all this code to the student material so you can have it and check by yourselves. Okay, thank you for your attention, and well, you should have the lunch break now, right? Already late. Sorry for taking too long.
I actually have a question
Yes.
about this convergent extension model. So, because this model, I know this model is kind of like a simple version of convergent extension, but I'm wondering if, because I mean, like the tissue is doing a global convergent extension, which is the right way that it elongates along one axis and narrows along the other. But I'm wondering, because the cells doesn't look right, because during the convergent extension, the cells is actually polarized, not like along the elongation axis, but like perpendicular along the elongation axis. I'm wondering, is there a way to do that?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, Usually, well, you can add the cell elongation plugin, right, to make the
Yeah.
cells be elongated. But when you do that on top of this, you usually get the cells to be elongated in the wrong direction because you are basically pulling two things together that are elongated, and then what they do, they should try to do this, right? So
Okay.
you get the wrong shape, right? So uh, so when I used this model, I was most interested in, okay, what's the large scale effect of the cells trying to circulate in one direction. So for me, when I try to do that, you do the lean bud paper. I didn't care much about the cell shapes because the cell shapes are super complicated in those limbs to begin with.